you guys are probably becoming increasingly familiar with a problem that's known as big data. It's a term that's getting a lot of attention. It's getting attention in a lot of different directions. The core problem behind big data is essentially that we're producing and saving and storing and squirreling away way more information than we can possibly process or make sense of using a lot of technology. You've probably seen some of these stats before, but I'll just go over some of them. YouTube, 60 hours of video uploaded every minute, which means, it's not even possible it's just way beyond even theoretically possible for someone to keep up what's going on there, everything that's happening on YouTube. Twitter, 750 tweets per second. That's actually, probably a good 9-month-old, that stat. I'm sure it's actually much larger than that. On LinkedIn, and I thought this was actually kind of interesting, particularly for professional marketers, there are more than 1 million special interest groups, right? 1 million, which really gets into mind of just, how narrow people's interests getting. How do you actually communicate into a market that's so heavily fragmented in terms of people's time and attention? All of that is also, as that activity continues, building and storing information. Here's another set of some interesting statistics where it was like a good infographic. This was really based on last year's London Games. And, I'll really just let the numbers themselves make some of the impression. 200,000 hours of big data just in testing IT systems before the games are started. Once they get going, it was expected 60 gigabytes of information flowing across BT per second, just having to do with the games themselves, right? And as it says here, it's the equivalent of all of Wikipedia being transmitted every 5 seconds. And it just keeps continuing. 4 billion people watching, 8.5 billion devices connecting to the internet, expected to attach or to pay attention to the games. 13,000 tweets per second during the games themselves, which is a huge spike in activity going on Twitter. All of this is immensely overwhelming. Now, what does it really mean for marketers, right? We can all marvel at those, and we feel like really it's more of a technology challenge, definitely a challenge for IT, what to do with the data. But marketing BD really have their own version of the same problem, and we call it big content. If we take a look at just one firm, this is based on a firm that we've been working with for more than a decade. In the first iteration of their site, the first one that we worked on, they launched in 2001 with about 40 publications. Now they have about 4,000. And if you just continue the growth trend, you end up, in about 10 years, possibly looking at 40,000 content items. Because, of course, none of these things rarely get deleted, and that's actually okay. We don't want to delete them. So you really have to imagine, what are you really doing to somebody, a visitor, when you're offering an information store of 40,000 publications. And it comes down to essentially this view, right? This is the audience's perspective on what's happening out there, even in the relatively narrow realm of professional services websites or legal websites. The problem is that out of all that stuff that you offer, even say the 4,000 publications and news items you have today, an increasingly small percentage is relevant to any one person, right? They're not interested in the full 4,000. There's nobody who's interested in the full 4,000. What they might be interested in is one slice. And if you don't control for that, what you end up with is essentially information overload. And it is a real challenge to the experience that you are creating as you're trying to communicate and offer this stuff to audiences. And the way that we like to think about it is that if you don't do anything to control this flow of information, what happens is your communications begin to look, feel, and act like work. And that's simply not fun. So the first things first, before we tackle any significant problem here at One North, we like to assign blame, of course, right? So we ask ourselves, whose fault is this? And of course, the problem is us. This is the handy One North strategy team, if you haven't seen our shiny faces before. We're the guys out there telling you to go put a ton of content up there. We're the ones telling you that content marketing is an effective strategy. Of course, I'm being a little facetious. Content isn't really the problem. It's not the actual presence of 4,000 items that's the issue out there. It's the fact that you need to really give people a way to access it. And we need to control that experience. We need to prevent the feeling of overload by using these kinds of tactics: organizing, engaging, adapting, and analyzing. So, so far easily said, right? What do we do to actually achieve that? So I'm going to give you 3 steps today to cracking the problem of big content, a way of controlling that experience so that you can offer a full range of information, a rich store of data as a marketer, without creating the feeling of information overload. The first step, step 1, is to simply keep calm. This is the One North Pet lemur meme, if you haven't seen this one. The fact of the matter is that information overload is not a new phenomenon. I think it's really easy, especially in a post-internet world, to assume that a lot of things started with the internet and that in the information age, these problems simply didn't exist, or we're the first people to deal with the whole issue of information overload. And so I really feel like the first thing we need to realize is that this isn't a technology problem in and of itself. Ever since people have been able to write information down, like literally ever since the point of literacy where people could record information, there have been some people who have complained that there is way too much information. And if you just take a look at these quotes, I mean, we start off with a quote from the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes, of making books there is no end. You go through the Romans, Greeks, even Erasmus, who, if you don't know, is a prominent scholar in the 1500s, such as a flood of books that even things that might have done some good lose all their goodness. And that is kind of a sentiment that I feel like a lot of marketers who are trying to communicate into a crowded and fragmented market feel like, what is the point of putting out more out there? Everything is just so overwhelming. So this isn't a new phenomenon. And if you're wondering where I got a lot of these quotes or where we got some of this information, there's a really great book by a historian at Harvard called Ann Blair, called Too Much to Know, Managing Scholarly Information Before the Modern Age. She's, of course, focused on scholarly information, but it's actually kind of fascinating. It's really a great overview of how people manage and consume information prior to the rise of digital technology. And as she points out, we've been creating rules and tools for ourselves over thousands of years that help guide overwhelmed readers and consumers' information. And those tools are things like categorization, just breaking things up into buckets, indices, alphabetization. I think that that's something that some people don't realize actually had to be invented, right? The whole notion of breaking things up by sorting them alphabetically and separating them out alphabetically is something that we have a bunch of monks in the 900s to thank for, because it didn't actually exist until they came up with it. And then notions of summation and compilation. And all of these tips and tricks are things that we do today. So I'm going to point out what some of them look like. The notion of categorization. I mean, every time you look at a main navigation bar and look at what we call the information architecture of a site, we're essentially talking about what are the categories of your content. So this is one of the first things that we do, and almost all modern websites do this, right? This is the first thing we do to try to control, a sort of unbounded flow of information. Compilation, this is where we pull things maybe from separate categories, kind of outline a theme or a story amongst our content. Very often it shows up in what we like to call magazine-style layout. In fact, magazines are kind of the paragons of compilation and summation, right? They take a look at a bunch of information. They might give you short blurbs. They might arrange collections of stories and pieces of information in a layout that gives you kind of an overview. Indices, of course, this is a kind of a mega footer, right? That has kind of a sitemap stuck in the footer, but we still do this in a lot of different situations. An index is, we think of it as a thing at the back of a book. Frankly, even a table of contents at the front of the book is technically a type of index, right? So we do this all over the place to give people a sense of what's going on. And even alphabetization, every single time you see that big A to Z list up on a site that helps you find people, you're essentially relying on a technique of alphabetization. And it is so ingrained into how we consume information now that notice there's not even like an indication to people what that A to Z is all about. We don't even have to tell them why those letters are up there. Everyone knows, right? And I'm not actually advocating that you do tell them. The whole point is you don't have to, right? We all understand alphabetization, and we all get it. It's a highly useful and functional way to access long lists of data, in this case, just people. So, moving on to step 2 of this, and this step is to simply carry on, right? Take those tips forward. What can we do now that we are in a more digital information age? How can we improve on those time-honored tricks? Well, the great thing about interactive media, and where this really differs from the sort of historical tricks, is this allows the individual to take control of how they access information. So things like compilation, alphabetization, all of those tricks are really ones where the effort and the organizing is done by whoever's producing the information. In this age, right now, we have a lot of tools, including search, social, filters, the use of tagging, personalization, data visualization. All of these help people, each individual person, create their own view or take their own cut of what's available. And I'm going to show you what some of these look like. Search, of course, is it's one of the most powerful things to happen to information access. It has changed completely the way we think about information. I'm always amazed at how, I went to school, went to grad school, kind of as the information age was getting out, developed a lot of tricks for finding information using indices and old books. It's all been completely replaced by the single search box. It's great. It's actually, as I put up here, why Google is a verb and Yahoo is a cautionary tale. Yahoo, you guys might remember, and it's still very much like a listing and compilation service. It has a search engine, but it's since licensed it out to Bing. Google got rid of all of that. The whole list of links idea, all compilation, just replaced it with a single search box. And the success of Google over Yahoo is, in many ways, about the success of search over some of those older techniques. Of course, it's also imperfect, and I'm going to draw your attention to the screenshot. I don't know how well you guys can see this, but this was done by a colleague of mine, Jen Bullitt, who is a sometime presenter here at One North 2, who was simply looking for some M&Ms. So she typed in M&Ms into Google and got their shopping index, and up came a spring facial hair remover. Now, she assures me this has nothing to do with her own shopping history, so sorry, Jen. But it just goes to show that it's still not an entirely perfect experience, and it's probably a good sign that you can't rely on search completely. So now taking a look at the social aspect. Now, we're all familiar with social media, and we've probably all thought about how to communicate into networks. But social connections are actually a good way for people to find information. And the way that they really assist is that it helps bring together ideas of influence and curation. It's a way that we can extend into our personal network and allow our personal network to give us some indications of what information is useful, what information is valuable amongst a big store. And here you're just simply looking at an edge of the New York Times site, where they have a main article kind of cut off here on the left, but on the side they have popular on Facebook, which is a good way for me to find stories that people inside my own network think are useful. And even just simple things down here like most emailed give you another view, most viewed, give you another idea of what's happening, what information do other people find useful. And I think we've all found this very helpful to ourselves. I don't know about you guys, but I am much more likely to click on something that's like one of the top 5 most viewed stories, even if the headline wouldn't necessarily grab my attention if I had seen it outside of this context. I'm now a lot more likely to click on it because I figure, well, if everybody else has looked at this, maybe it's something that's worth my time as well. This also happens in different contexts. This is actually an email. This is actually one of my favorite email marketing techniques. This is from news.me, which is a service that I don't know if you guys have taken a look at out there. But it's essentially another way of allowing your social networks to help curate information for you. So if you sign up for news.me, it hooks into your Twitter account and your Facebook account, and it will send you stories that are getting a lot of attention and comment within your own social network. So every morning I get an email like this that says top stories for me. Of course, it's not stories that I've looked at. These are actually stories shared by my friends, and they say, here's the best 5 of the bunch. And I have to tell you, this is a lot more useful. I initially signed up for this just simply out of curiosity. I wanted to see how it worked. Now, I actually continue to use it. I'm actually curious every morning what's going to pop up across my different social networks as the 5 most important stories. Filters are another way, and these are kind of a way to make things like alphabetization indexes a little bit more dynamic. This is Yahoo's stock screener service for how you find stocks and can search for them. To me, this is a lesson in how not to design filters, and a big part of the reason why Yahoo continues to have trouble, which is really a lack of attention to user experience, because this screen just, I mean, if there's any screen that feels like work, it's this one. I mean, this is immensely useful and powerful, but it is a lot of work just to get through the search form in order to find stocks within a particular range or profitability. Much more common now is you're beginning to see filters laid out in a more progressive nature, where you have an information store, you apply a filter, see how well the filter works, maybe apply another one, maybe remove one. This is from Nordstrom's store. You notice here, if I'm looking for a blazer, if I go to Nordstrom, they have literally hundreds. It can be a completely overwhelming experience if I'm looking for blazers, trying to flip through and look through hundreds of blazers. What I can do is narrow it down by size, which I've done here, brown. I can narrow it down by a price range or the brand, even whether or not it's currently available in the store. It's a much more useful way that we're probably used to seeing on a lot of different sites. When we take a look at tagging, this comes up also in the name like taxonomy. You'll see this is really kind of very prevalent on a social network like Twitter. Tagging is really, all about flexible concepts and ideas that get attached to content, and then each one of those tags becomes a way to find information. So this is from the Fenwick and West site. This is a law firm based on the West Coast, heavily into IP, and on their site they have a tagging mechanism that allows them, and actually external people can even suggest a topic, allows them to tag information with topic, different topics. Here they've taken a publication, tag it with things like employment agreements, executive severance, non-qualified deferred compensation. If you click on one of those tags, what you get in response is basically search results across the entire site that shows me every piece of content that they have to offer that is tagged to that idea, theme, or topic. So here it's everything attached to employment ingredients, and that includes employment agreements, and that includes professionals, includes experience items, so prior work that they've done, news, and publications. Personalization is a really big theme this year as well, and it's really, you're probably most used to how it helps you find information on a big shopping site like Amazon. We've all seen the new for you or recommended for you. Now, many of us have often noticed that it's sometimes a little imperfect. The items it suggests are not the ones we're interested in, are not necessarily the ones we're interested in. But we're all familiar that this is a way that people find stuff, especially in an enormously complex and deep site like Amazon. It can be a really useful way to find things you might be interested in. We're beginning to see this show up in other ways and in new kind of modes. So in addition to just showing, recommended items or items based on your shopping history, we're seeing people hook it in a little bit more subtle and sophisticated way. This is from another shopping site called Guilt. Now you'll see their version of the filters here. I've left that open to show that they do a really great job of just letting you filter down information. What I want to draw your information to over here is this little pop-up box over here on the left called Love This Brand. What this site will do is actually, as you shop, it will notice that if you begin to show interest in items of a particular brand, this will pop up. And what it's offering you here is actually, I think, kind of extraordinary. It's not just offering like an email subscription or something like that. It says, hey, if you like this brand, let me know, and when they go on sale, I'll send you a note, which is a really helpful thing, because you might be looking at something and think, well, not at that price or not full price. You may not know when it goes on sale. You might be frustrated later if it goes on sale and you didn't know about it. So it's really turning the notion of personalization into adding value for you, right? So if you come to this and you think, hey, it's great, but I'm going to wait for a little bit, see if it goes on sale, they're giving you a mechanism to make that happen. Finally, in this set of tricks, data visualization. This is another big trend, which we think is great. It often goes by, there's a reason I called it data visualization and not infographics. I think a lot of things that go under the term infographics is simply about making ugly numbers prettier, right? And a lot of times you get like a big stat or number and a couple cartoons, frankly, illustrated cartoons that are trying to get you interested in it. In our mind, the best data visualization is really about making complex sets of information a lot more understandable. So this is from the Chrysler site. If you go to this is about the town and country line. It's got some really great animated features about how the numbers build and what people, what the relationship to the brand. A lot of it's about loyal, Chrysler loyalty. You can also take a look at GE site. Now GE is actually kind of a pioneer in data visualization. They have an entire blog dedicated to it. I encourage you guys to go take a look. It's not just cool. I think there's a lot of inspiration out there that marketers could take a look at. And it's a good sign that how sometimes the information, or often the information, doesn't have to be heavily structured. So this is a data visualization based on simply the text of their annual reports going back all the way to 1892. So they take just the unstructured text. And what you can do down here is, if you notice here, the words that appear on the bottom of the screen, you can click on any one of these words and it will start to show you where it's showing up in all of their annual reports. So here I've highlighted global, and you get the first mention you get is sometime in the early 1960s. It doesn't really pick up steam until the 1990s, and then it really takes off in the 2000s. And it can give you, as you click on some of these other things like aviation, health, digital technology, it can really give you an idea of, when was that topic in conversation over this period. It's actually a very interesting feature to use. So how do we bring that all together? I think a lot of that was more easily said than done. How does that all bring together? How does that work within a professional marketing context? Well, we did a quick little experiment that you can actually go to if you click on this link here, examples.onenorthinteractive.com/trustworthy. It's just a little research and development exercise. It's a fake firm. There is no firm out there called Trustworthy. But what we did was try to imagine how could we bring this all together in a way that makes sense within professional services marketing. So taking a slightly closer look, this is a reimagined service page, and we deliberately took a look at this service page because we feel like these are the pages that often need the most work. I think there's going to be nobody who will be astounded by my statement that this is probably some of the most boring content available. But we've really tried to make it a lot more vibrant. We, of course, have notions of categorization. We've subcategorized the service page down into here: metrics, insights, news, experience, professionals. We've brought in some infographics that you can actually interact with to see notions of like where the activity for the service is. And when we approach the searching and listing, we're using some of those social features, right? Most viewed, most shared, most relevant. We've simplified the filtering mechanism down to a single keyword so people can enter in a filter. They can add more than one. They can easily remove one that's already been existed to try to narrow down the publications, the news, the experience. So, even though in a lot of the prior examples I showed you things from Amazon, from shopping sites, GE, Chrysler, my big message here is that none of that is necessarily belongs to consumer brands or large organizations. There are some really great ways just to bring in some of those user experience techniques even into a more conservative, more corporate feel or presentation. So finally, this brings us to step 3, and there is a step 3, and that is to panic and freak out. So bear with me because I'm going to explain why that is right now. So in everything that I just showed you, in between the source content and those really great interactive techniques, tagging, personalization, there has to be a lot of analysis. And right now, all of that analysis needs to be done by actual people, and that means you. And I'm going to lay out why that actually is. I often like to say that content entry is a lie, right? It doesn't actually exist. And those of you who are actually responsible for content editing and publishing and interactive media are going to understand what I mean when I go through this. But let's say you get your content. It often comes in the form of a Word document. It's almost always completely unstructured. It might be a piece of text. Maybe even it's a piece of video, but that's all you've got at that point. Well, first you have to literally enter that into some kind of system, right? There's almost nothing that can just actually take a Word doc and go with it. So you're almost always busy copying and pasting, or literally just typing in some of the information. You then have to structure it, right? So almost all content management systems, in fact, all of them require that you break out some of the information. Sometimes this goes under the term normalization from the IT side, but it means you have to you have to identify the author, the title, break out the body, maybe break out the abstract. After you get it into the fields, you then have to start relating it to other pieces of content. So you might, instead of just typing in the name author, go and pick an author record that it's related to. You might relate the types of products or services in your own organization that it's related to. So you have to take that piece of content and start hand drawing links to other pieces of content. If you're using a tagging or taxonomy metaphor, and this is even just when you're using like social media and Twitter, you actually have to sit there and think about the right kinds of tags you're going to use. You have to add them to the information to make that mechanism work. And if you're using personalization, you often have to score the content along certain dimensions. So if you're trying to personalize targeting specific demographics, you actually have to tell the content management system, well, which demographics, for example, is this piece of content going to be really helpful for? And all of that is just an immense amount of work. It's enough to make the average CMO just break down in tears. Sorry, I love this picture, although I'm pretty convinced that our poor CMO baby is crying because of the truly hideous wig they put her in. Maybe not quite so much the content entry. It's just criminal, isn't it? Okay, so moving on. Why? Why do you have to do so much work? Is it because the producers of CMS systems are cruel? No, I mean, the core reason why people have to continue doing that work is that computers can't read. Not even Google knows what the information that it's processing means. You know, they can highlight words that are happening as they've got a lot of really great statistical algorithms, but they don't actually understand the meaning of what they're dealing with. Now, here is where the entire topic that I'm talking to you about big data is going to kind of loop in itself. So I began with big data as kind of a problem that produces information overload. Well, there's a lot of research into big data trying to deal with that that is also going to be the solution. So these names, and these are some big names, Microsoft Research, IBM, Hadoop is actually an open source project working on some of the same stuff. All of these guys are working really hard at how to take a look at unstructured information, that text, that document that you actually just start with. And at that stage, how to get a computer to actually understand what that content means. And that is also going under the term big data. So if you guys are curious, you may take a look at some of the IBM stuff. IBM has done a lot of really great research. They've got some beta tools. Now, this is not pretty. As a designer, I desperately want to start controlling and rearranging the screen. But if you can put up with the design, it's actually a very interesting tool to use. This is IBM's Many Bills site, little Many Bills tool. It is designed to help you understand what's going on in the laws being passed in the federal government. What this site does is take just a simple text, the text of bills, laws that are under consideration, some of which have passed, some of which haven't, and analyze it and try to figure out what is that bill about. So I've done a search here for, the Jumpstart Our Business Startups bill, which is part of, the American Jobs Act, or, being was really considered along the same time. It's found 3 different versions. You might be a little bit confused, but these columns are 3 different versions, and that's because of the way that we pass laws. We have different versions that might be under consideration by different committees, different versions by a House bill, maybe a Senate bill. So it's identified the versions of law that apply. And although it's hard to see here, I can it's actually gone through the text of the bill and try to figure out, okay, this part of the bill is about taxes, this is about finance, this might be changes in the law, this might be about intelligence activities, maybe another part is about national security. So it's a really interesting tool if you're looking through these laws and saying, well, what part of this is actually about tax structure? You can actually use this tool to filter down and say, show me parts of the bill that are about taxes, right? And if you are working within a field like law or finance or investment banking, you can see the power of this, right? Because otherwise, it requires hiring people, really knowledgeable people, either accountants, finance people, lawyers themselves, to read through this and tell your business how is this going to affect our tax structure. This is the beginning of starting to see research tools that can actually provide a very significant lift in that regard. Now, what does this mean, again, for marketers? So it's a nifty R&D. But here's how it's really going to help you. We really think that in 10 years, and that might even be too conservative, I think it's going to be a lot more aggressive than that. You're going to start seeing web content management systems start to take that unstructured data from you and be able to pass it out to a tool like IBM. Now, that's what I'm trying to say is, the web content management system itself isn't going to get a huge, big data and analysis engine. It's probably not plausible to presume that it will. But people like IBM are producing a lot of these services in the cloud, which means that they're shared services that you can use, send information to, and get information back. You don't have to buy software or download software. They exist out there on the internet. We think that the web CMS is going to be able to send content to these cloud-based systems. Those cloud-based systems, just like the many build site, are going to hand back a set of structured data, right? They're going to do a lot of the structuring, the tagging, the analysis of that data for you, and that is what's going to lead to a really great user experience for you. So it's going to alleviate a lot of that headache. And eventually what that means is that you will spend a lot less time trying to teach your CMS what your communications mean, and instead you can get back to the meat of real marketing, which sometimes comes down to teaching people what the word pop means, or indeed teaching people that the word pop doesn't mean anything. So that's it. A quick recap for what to do about big content. As we said, first one, keep calm. Don't try to blame this on a technology issue. It's not a technology issue. And don't blame the content. Content is good. This is not a call to sort of slow down your content production. We actually believe that in almost all situations people should ramp it up. Try to take a look at some of the interactive capabilities that we've reviewed, right? So take a look at filtering mechanisms, personalization. Take a look at how social tools and not just social media can help people find and reduce the information overload that's kind of coming at them. And then finally, don't panic. There's a lot of people working on the content management work on the background. So keep an eye on some of the what's going on in the cloud. Keep an eye on new technology. Some really exciting things are coming. And with that, we're done. It's a pretty quick and easy presentation. Tanya, I think we're ready to open it up to any questions.
Yep, just a reminder, if you have a question, you can submit it using the question function, which is located in the GoToWebinar control panel at the right side of your screen. All right, we've got one question in. It is, how does content curation play into this?
That is a good question. So I mentioned it very briefly on one slide, but I did not go into it. It's actually a very key tool that you're beginning to see a lot of right now. The idea of curation, for those of you who don't know that concept, is simply the idea that people play value and organizations play value simply by going through a bunch of material and editing it down for what other people need to know. So it can be as simple as, I or you saying, I've gone through, these 300 publications, here's the 5 that I think are the most important for you. And the real power we're beginning to see in it is that curators in general are often becoming the personality behind it. They're often getting a lot more attention even than the producers of content themselves. So if you develop a reputation as a really great curator, then you become the valuable source of information, even if the actual content is being written and produced by somebody else. And that role is something that we're beginning to see a lot of professional firms start to take, right? We're beginning to see firms within legal, firms within finance, definitely firms like McKinsey, realize that not all great content necessarily is written, produced originally from them, but they're still maintaining a great advisory role, a great editorial role, it's a great service that they provide for their audiences simply by being able to go through and select, here's the stuff that is worth your attention.
Hey, Colin, just a question. How do you actually get started with personalization? What are some of the first steps in thinking through how you're going to serve up specific content to specific people?
That's actually another good thing. So personalization is, a lot of times we think about it as a giant engine or a feature that you add onto a site and it does the magic and it does it for you. But it really does require a lot of thought into how you're actually producing the content itself and who you're producing it for. And it goes back to, just thinking really hard about the idea of user personas, and that in and of itself is kind of a techie term, but it's really thinking about user personas is thinking about your audiences, which has always been a good marketing tactic. So if you want to make personalization work, especially if you want to approach the idea of personalization without adding a lot of technology, a lot of it comes down to being really thoughtful about who you're talking about. And that means going beyond, well, I'm talking to clients or I'm talking to prospective clients, right? It means even going beyond, well, who are my prospective clients? They're CEOs, right? Those are just too broad a category to really be meaningful, to create an experience for the person that this was personalized or really targeted to them. To do really good personalization, which is about that experience, right? Really good personalization is that the audience person getting, yeah, I get it, this is for me, right? Like, they're really talking to me right now. If that's the experience you need and want your audience members to have, then you have to think really hard about what are their interests, how do they consume information. In the traditional ad world, we talk about demographics because demographics were a good rule of thumb for making conclusions about where they were and how they consumed information. I think what's interesting now is that I don't think a lot of traditional demographics, even going down to things like gender and age, and the amount of money people have, are good rules of thumb for how they consume information. I think people are a lot more flexible, and people are finding some really surprising trends in information consumption. About where people are finding information. You'd be surprised the number of older people who are all over Twitter, and that's how they prefer to get information. Similarly, I know several sub-25-year-olds who really don't spend any time at all on Facebook, or just have chosen not to have a Facebook page. You really just can't use just traditional age blocks for that. So you have to be thoughtful about where people are, how do they want to get information, and then tune your content efforts. And all that can be done ahead of relying on a complicated piece of technology to come in and do that work for you.
All right, the next question is, how would video play into categorization?
That's a good question, because I think still right now, and it was definitely the case when people really first started dealing with video in the early 2000s, video was its own category, right? You had all the content on the site, and then you might even have a section called video, right? I don't think that works anymore, and part of it's because of prolificness of video out there on the web. People are a lot more sophisticated. I think the key thing to remember when you're dealing with video and categorization is that video is a media type. It's not a content type, meaning the content type of the video is really whatever the video is about. Is it an announcement from your organization? Is it a comment from some users? Is it about thought leadership? Is it a product demo? So that is what the content of the video is. Now, is the distinction between, say, a text-based article and a video meaningful to a user? Yes, but in that case, I would say, your trick is to allow people to filter or find information of a particular media type that might also be useful. In other words, it might be good to let people search for written articles versus video on your site. But it's not a content category in and of itself, which means I don't think you should have like a main content category where you put all the video together, right? If you're producing, original publications and you have videos that are related to that, then your videos should be with those other publications, rather than, essentially segregated into their own isolated bucket.
All right, that's all the questions we have. As always, if you have questions after the session, you can always email us. You can email Kalev at kpeekna@onenorth.com or me at tortiz@onenorth.com. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and have a great day.